All right, a little bit of a technical difficulty with our countdown timer. Welcome to today's Flow Short, Value Stream Management and Ways of Working Frameworks. I'm joined by Steve Pereira and I'm Joshua Barnes. And yeah, another interesting topic, especially the way they've been kind of building over the past maybe few weeks now. Steve, I think while you were out on your grand tour, Helen and I talked a little bit about frameworks with respect to value stream management. So just a tiny little bit. And so for those of you, Helen Beal, who's the chairman of the board, the CEO of the VSMC, one of the previous Flow Shorts, we kind of did touch on this. And I think part of the discussion was around, should value stream management really be more of the overarching approach versus trying to adopt a particular framework? And this was really in discussion around agile frameworks and so forth. So yeah, I'm glad that we're going to continue on with this topic. So with respect to that, I think that there is a lot of discussion around how frameworks drive a lot of the organizational transformations that we see organizations do. It's still today, right? This has been going on for, a decade or two now. But this question does come up a lot, right? So some of the sort of public facing training I do, I'll get people from head of a PMO or whatever, and they'll say, well, we've adopted Scrum, or we've adopted, one of the scaling approaches. And how would value stream management fit into that framework? Where I like to see it, it's kind of the other way around, right? A lot of those frameworks are really focused at team level stuff, right? Even at the scaled approach. I mean, a lot of where organizations and the focus is going to be, if it's a team of teams construct versus just teams adopting an approach based on Scrum or a time box based approach, versus what we see in value stream management, which is looking at really end-to-end flow, right? And that delivery team is just one part in that flow, an important part, but one part.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And it's valuable to have a lens that allows us to zoom out to the larger perspective of what does it take to actually build and deliver value rather than just work and output to customers, right? I mean, you have to cross a critical threshold in order to make a change or work actually valuable. It's got to make it to your customers. And that requires a bunch of moving pieces that aren't necessarily captured in your iterations at the team level or within a scrum or a sprint. You've got things like marketing, you have things like not just delivering features, but turning them on and monitoring their performance in production. You have things like initial upfront planning, right? I mean, the entire lead time of the path to production is always longer than we think. And we tend to move the goalposts because it's a lot easier to measure a smaller scope of that. But I definitely agree with you. I think it's in some ways over top all of these specific methodologies and practices, but we can also consider it below. It's kind of a foundational aspect of business that is just how companies build and deliver value. Like the most fundamental aspect of being in business, it really is value stream management, right? You're creating these value streams and putting them to work and then improving them over time. And I think that an awareness of that allows you to plug in these specific methodologies and frameworks into a context of the big picture that actually matters to not only the business, but customers.
Yeah. And something that comes to mind is actually, I think it was something I saw that you had done on YouTube. So it was a YouTube video about on something. And you were talking about sort of micro level changes or improvements versus, I think it was macro level stuff. And I think that if we were looking at something we see a lot, like in the State of Agile report every year, right? It's like, accelerate time to market, always towards the top. And if you improve team performance, how much of that is really going to accelerate time to market when you're looking at where a request or an idea comes in? And like you said, it's got to go through portfolio management. We got to decide, is it something we want to do? Do we have budget for it? Do people have capacity? And all the things along that value delivery flow. And a lot of the frameworks are going to be focused on team level stuff. Not all of them, but again, the agile frameworks typically are. And will something like improving team performance by 25%, right? Oftentimes we're not going to see these hundreds or thousands of percent improvement, right? Unless you got some really big problems with your teams. But if you're looking at some of the things that we could do from a VSM perspective, that might be a more significant change all the way through that flow, like a smaller batch size of work. That's going to be a much significant contributor, one of these macro level potential improvements to getting things to market quicker and getting feedback quicker all the way on through.
Yeah, and if from a practitioner's perspective or a leadership perspective, when you're in the middle of the organization, oftentimes, if you've got these blinders on of your scope of regular activity, then it's very difficult to translate that into a compelling business case or something that is going to resonate with senior leadership, board members, external stakeholders, partners, because they don't, they are not focused on that view. They're focused on a bigger picture much more often, at a higher level, more connected to customer outcomes, revenue, market share, these really consequential numbers to the overall business. And so being able to kind of place your context in a larger context, and zoom out and zoom in. You can't spend all your time zoomed out, especially when you're accountable for these sprint level activities or something more operational. But value stream management does give you the ability to zoom out and then place your perspective and your insights in a context that can resonate with folks who really don't want to be in the detail. They don't want to be in the weeds. They don't want to be zoomed in. They have much more consequential responsibilities and accountability at that high level.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think we're also starting to see with respect to frameworks is bringing in more content or more guidance on value stream management. At least in my experience, I think Discipline Agile was the first that did that. Their Discipline Agile Value Stream consultant content that came out a couple of years ago is a really sort of solid, sort of agnostic approach, because no matter what your way of working or ways of working is, right, it can potentially help you. But we saw that with SAFE, right? So SAFE's last big update included content on value stream management. So I think we're seeing frameworks, at least some of them, and I wouldn't say DA is a framework, but it's kind of sort of lumped into that broader category. But we are seeing content that's being brought in, which is also good to see.
Yeah, and another big shift that I'm seeing is ITIL as well. Like ITIL's making big investment into trying to place their content in the context of the value stream, because it is such a valuable model for representing what all of these frameworks really care about, right, at the end of the day. And I think it was kind of natural for them to start, first of all, from a projects perspective, from a smaller scale perspective, because that was the sphere of influence and the sphere of relevant context for technology at the time. Now we see technology interwoven with every aspect of business, and it's very difficult to say that this is technology and this is not, right? I mean, it's all business. And so the value stream and value stream management gives you this almost Rosetta Stone between business and technology, that you can now put all these efforts and all these frameworks in context with a universal model that kind of resonates across the board, which is really interesting when you start to think about the idea that you could be deploying all these frameworks within a single organization and have them all speak the same language of value, production, and delivery. with metrics that don't need to be translated and models that don't need to be translated back and forth, and a lack of conflict between all of these, because it is possible for them to speak the language of value streams.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something else that I don't think it's anywhere near a tipping point. We are seeing a lot more interest, from project professionals, right? So from PMOs that want to become like a value delivery office, they want to be focusing more on, improving the environment where the work gets done versus managing scope and schedule and those types of things. Taking a look at, is the work that's being done really producing value? And if not, do we have an approach that enables us to be, agile and from a business agility standpoint, make informed decisions to be able to pivot or change to something a lot more quickly. And looks like we do have a good question. How is AI influencing frameworks and changing approaches? I know we've touched on this a little bit before in some of the other flow shorts, and you had some really good thoughts as far as I think flow metrics and so forth from an AI utilization perspective. You want to share some thoughts there?
I would say, I think that an interesting opportunity for generative AI is smoothing the edges of this translation between different contexts and giving us different ways of interpreting not only our organizational landscape, but our landscape in context with the frameworks that we're adopting and trying to utilize. And what I mean by that is all these frameworks have extensive documentation, some more than others. You can teach an AI about a framework very, very quickly, right? I mean, you can feed in a bunch of information that gives the framework understanding of terminology and concepts and how these things relate to each other. And there's lots of commentary online about these things by now. So some interesting things can happen when you start to talk about, how would you deal with, addressing this flow problem in a specific context, and we're using this framework. Or I have a challenge between this department and this department. They're using this framework, they're using this framework. How would you address this? So sort of there's a coaching opportunity that you can I wouldn't trust it, but I would use it as a second opinion, or, a first rough draft of like, what does the AI think about all this information? And then I think that there is a lot of opportunity to sort of translate between what you see in an organization and what an AI could sort of translate to a framework context, knowing that documentation and the context around the framework. Now, that is very speculative at the moment. It's moving fast. And as the frameworks are moving faster than the AI content, they're all becoming ahead of where the AI is going to be catching up in terms of context. So there may be limited value there, but I found it really interesting as running thought experiments and being able to sort of understand and evaluate these frameworks in different ways by using AI to kind of parse them and spit them back at me from different perspectives.
Yeah. And I guess we'd be remiss if we didn't also mention, become a member of the VSMC and you get access to Flow Buddy.
That's a good highlight, yes.
Right, which is an AI that's been trained on the VSMC content plus some additional content. And I think that's getting to go live soon. I don't think it's live already.
Yeah, I think so. I'm bad with dates. I'm bad with keeping track of my calendar. Joshua, this is the only thing I show up to on time.
So Flow Buddy, I'll put some more. Oh, look, yep. So Flow Buddy will be public. Thank you, Helen. I was hoping you would chime in around July 8th. Yeah, so it's something some of the VSMC members have had access to, and it's quite cool. And July 8th, it'll be available for general release. I know this is turning into a flow long, but we do have one other thing here, and I thought it'd be good if we could at least comment on this question as well. How do you encourage people to think about actual flow of value? So in my experience and a lot of the consulting work that I do, for me, the the best approach I found is to visualize what's going on and to use some examples. Because when you can show from a flow perspective how often work is waiting, how big some of the queues are, how often work goes forwards and backwards, and really seeing the connection of all the stuff that has to actually happen for something to be released and be consumable, that can paint a very, very compelling picture that people can kind of get behind. And it also takes a little bit at least of the emotion out of it, where it's, this is what's going on. And when you have examples with enough content in it, it's not going to maybe narrow in on one person, one team, one area or whatever, but it can kind of show, here's what's going on. Now let's figure out where we can make some improvements and what it would take to do that.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that I think it's really important to place all these efforts into a larger global context. So
Yeah.
pick something that the company really wants to do, the organization is aiming for, and that's very valuable to the organization, and bridge what's valuable to you with that, so that you can bridge with these other silos, because these other silos in the organization are incentivized by their own concerns and their own targets. But everyone in the organization should be able to point to that North Star and say, okay, well, yes, we can agree on this. And that can override these local parochial concerns. And I think that's a great point, just to even have a common understanding. When you're negotiating, when you're trying to get people on board with something, you want to get agreement on something as soon as possible. So can we both agree that this is important? And then we can work from there. That can get people on board, but also place what you're aiming at in terms of, this is valuable from your perspective, to reconcile that against what the organization believes and what these other stakeholders believe, because all those have to be aligned, or else you're kind of just going to be fighting inertia.
Yep. And Patrice kind of beat me to it. I was going to also bring up once again Steve's recently released book of flow engineering techniques.
Outcome mapping is great for this. I found it to be incredible for aligning perspectives and getting people focused on, what are we really trying to do? What can we all agree on?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And if you're watching this on replay, if you have any questions, as always, put it in the comments. We do try and keep up with this, and we'll see you next week for our next Flow Short.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Joshua.